want to go over the idea of potentiometric surface with you here. So, defined as an imaginary surface that defines the theoretical level to which water would rise in a confined aquifer. So, just to try and look at this in a bit of a simpler way, before we look at the aquifer, we're going to have a look at the same concept, but with a water tower providing water to houses. So, if you don't know, this is how water is delivered to your house, unless you're someone who has what's called a borehole, which is pretty unlikely. So the water comes through a pipe to your home, and when it arrives at your home, it's under pressure. It's what's called mains pressure. This is why if people who are doing building work on the street burst the water main, the water comes flying out of the water main to a great height. I might even insert a video to show you. So if someone were to be digging into here and they've sort of dug a hole down, and then maybe they're trying to build something and then they accidentally burst the water main here, the water in this pipe has the pressure and the power to rise all the way up to this level here. Now obviously once it leaves the pipe, it's not going to actually rise all the way up to that surface, because that's how high it would rise if it was still confined within a pipe. Once it's no longer confined, the pressure is sort of heading out in all directions. It's no longer focused. But what you would find is you would get this enormous sort of spurting of water coming out of the ground. Okay, so that would be one example where you may have seen this in action. The reason we do this, the reason why we have the water tower like this, is so that you can have, say, a shower all the way sort of in the top of the house up there, and it will still get pressure. And where you start to get into difficulty is, say, for example, this may be the original housing, and then for whatever reason, someone might decide to build like a big tower block, beautifully drawn here. The flats up at the top would start to get not very good pressure, because whilst the water will rise to this level, the amount of power it then has will be lower. And you may have experienced the idea of water pressure in the house if you've ever had an accident in the house where sort of a pipe has burst, or something along those lines, or even if you just turn a tap on high, then that pressure is being generated purely by the gravity that's being created by the water tower. Okay, so this is the basis of the concept ultimately. And then if we go to, this is the diagram from the textbook and the diagram that we've used. So to understand this, what we want to do is, we've got three different levels. We've got level C, we've got level B, and level A. Really irritating with this diagram. For some reason, they've named the water levels with lowercase letters and the wells, the boreholes, with uppercase letters, which makes it a bit confusing. But anyway, so the potentiometric surface for A is up here. Okay, so what this means is that the chalk layer of rock here is permeable. So water can permeate it and be stored within the chalk, but the clays on either side are not permeable. They are. It's not possible for water to enter them. So what happens is it rains in the recharge areas. So here it rains, and it rains over here in the other recharge area. Obviously it rains everywhere, but these are the only areas in which when it rains the water enters the aquifer, because this is where it meets the surface. So this is where the water is getting into the aquifer, and then because the water is pulled to the bottom of the aquifer by gravity, the water is now under pressure once it's down here in the lower part of the aquifer. Okay, so when you drill into it, just like if you were to burst the water main, it will rise under pressure. And what this line I've drawn up here across the map A, this is the potentiometric surface. This is the height that the water would potentially rise to if it can, basically. So this is the height it wants to rise to, the imaginary height. And if we look from this activity, all of the boreholes are below the potentiometric surface, meaning that the water will rise to the surface under its own pressure, and it will even come bubbling out of the top. It may even come sort of spurting out the top depending on how much pressure there is. Okay, so that's what that means. If the potentiometric surface is higher than the actual land surface, then the well you have is an artesian well. It's one where water will rise to the surface under its own pressure. Okay. So for this, if we go all the way down to the third one, actually, so if we go down to C, in this situation, none of the wells are artesian because the potentiometric surface is lower than the actual surface of the land. So what it means is that for, say, wells C and D, the water will be in the well at that height, and B, but it won't be rising to the surface. So if you looked into the well, you would be able to see water there. Whereas E, the well here would actually be dry because the potentiometric surface and the water table is lower than the well. And the same over in A, you might just see some water in the bottom of A, but it won't be possible to actually use as a well. It's going to be literally maybe the ground at the bottom of the well might just be moist, but it's not actually full of water. Okay, so that's what the potentiometric surface means. All it is we have the water table, but the water table has been interrupted by an impermeable rock, and it's essentially a continuation of where the water table would be if it hadn't been interrupted, and this is where the water wants to rise to. Okay.